It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Craig Hoffman here. Logan Paulsen there. And oh my God, there's another face on the screen. That mustachioed man is Mike Renner, CBS Sports NFL and draft analyst. Mike, welcome back to the show, buddy.
What's up, fellas? Thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure. It's Renner season. We're here.
Dude, it's the best season, in my opinion. Not that it's Renner season. I wouldn't call it Renner season, but like draft season is the best season.
I did kind of set you up to sound like a pompous a-hole there.
Yeah.
You walked right into it. So excellent work out of you. We're going to take a look at Mike's view of the draft. I think this is the fun thing. We've been talking about all these different mock drafts. And, Logan, we've talked quite a bit about how just scouts have such different views on different players. And you'll hear like, oh, this team thinks that this guy that everyone's got in the first round is a sixth round guy. And it's like, well, actually one scout from one team thinks that, not the entire team. But it's fun to kind of get the different views of all the different folks that we can talk to. And luckily, Mike's a friend and has been willing to come on the show with us the past couple of years and do this. So without further ado, let's dive right in, Mike, to kind of the contour of this class. I feel like when we've done mocks, and I've looked at a lot of the other mocks, I feel really good about the players that are available at 29 for Washington. Like, even if they were picking, they trade down to the mid 30s, like 35, 36, that there's going to be someone of quality at a position that they could use available. Do you see the draft contouring that way?
Yeah, honestly, I think between picks 17 and picks 29, I don't think you're going to be getting that much different of a player. I think like it really is pretty tight in terms of like really, surefire first round grades. It's probably getting in like by pick 17, I'm not sure you're getting a stud type of player, but then it's not really that much different than pick 29 and not really that much different from like pick 40. It's kind of like a jumbled mess, but I really like day 2 of this draft class. I think there's a lot of talent and like at premium positions, more so than other years. Like there's offensive tackles that I like on day 2, which is rare to say. There's defensive ends that I really like on day 2. A lot of defensive tackles, a lot of wide receivers. So I think that's where the value ends up in this draft class. But like I said, pick 29 versus like maybe 10 to 12 picks higher, I don't see it being that much different of a player that you'll be getting.
Yeah, like we were talking before we got on, and obviously you said 29 is a tough spot to pick, especially for the Commanders. Can you talk about that a little bit, and then like kind of best case scenario for the Commanders in your opinion, and then obviously if the board falls a different way, like maybe they trade back or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of touches on what I just was mentioning, that pick 17, pick 29 won't be too much different. So any guy in that range could go pick 17, or he could fall all the way down to pick 29. Like there are mocks where Matthew Golden goes, 17. Then there are mocks where he falls all the way down to 29. There are mocks where, James Pierce Jr. comes off the board at pick 19, or he falls all the way to the back end of the first round. So there's just this kind of group at that bottom of the first round where, again, any of those guys, probably about 15 of them could go as high as, the late teens, or they could fall out of the first round entirely. So it's a unique year to project. And then especially for the Commanders, where it's like, they hit their needs in free agency. There's not a position where it's like, okay, we have to address this now. They were very good about addressing those all in free agency. So then at that point, you kind of just play the board, right? You can kind of just say, whatever falls to me, or whatever the value is, wherever the value is, that's where you go and attack.
And I think the hard part about projecting, and Logan, we talked about this for quite a while on, Tuesday's show? I don't know. What's a day anymore? It's draft season. Every day is Blur's Day. We like some of those guys are falling because of character stuff that we just don't know. Like we can watch the tape and be like, that guy's sick. And then all of a sudden it's like, why is he still there at 42? And then here comes Rappaport or Schefter or whoever with the story after. And you're like, oh. So are there guys that, you're paying attention to that maybe on some of the guys who are more tape focused, you're noticing that they're a little higher, and maybe some guys that are a little more plugged into the league and talking to GMs or whatever, you're like, oh, that guy seems to be falling a little bit. And then it's going to be up to, Adam Peters, for instance, in the Commanders case, to make a determination on whether or not it's worth drafting that guy.
Yeah, definitely a handful of guys I've heard for one reason or another could be falling. James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee, Mike Green from Marshall, Josh Simmons, the tackle from Ohio State. Who else? Luther Burden, the wide receiver from Missouri. Nick Scorton, the defensive end from Texas A&M. Like, there's a number of guys who, and that's not to say like they're off the field, on the field, just like there's something that won't be for every team. And now all those guys absurdly talented, right? I think in a vacuum, all those guys have first round caliber physical tools. It's just making sure it's the right fit for your franchise. So I think all those guys could be ones where they might be on the board at pick 29. You might pass them. You might be like, what the heck? Why do we just pass this guy? Well, it's like, it's not always that sort of conversation, just about what they can provide your football team. A lot of times it's what do they do Monday through Saturday for my football team. It's not always Sundays.
Yeah, and it's interesting to have that conversation because I think you also said it's a couple things there. One, like 17 to 29, kind of same tier of player for you. Also, the guys that are falling, interesting dynamic there. In terms of position, like offensive lineman, you think is going to be available? They kind of are in that group for you, and then maybe corner edge rusher also, because I think that's the thing that's kind of spicy is like because they've taken care of their stuff in free agency, right? You can kind of go in a multitude of different directions, and so if here are some names for the fans that are like, hey, I think these guys are worth this kind of 17 to 29 bucket.
Let's go O-line first. We can break it down, not just name 17 names at once.
Yeah, well, I like 17 names as once, but
I know you do, but Logan, I can't keep up with that.
Yeah.
So offensive line, I am of the opinion, just given what we saw in the Super Bowl, and a lot of GMs, as much as we want to think they're these, chess masters that are thinking 3 moves ahead, a lot of times they're just like reacting to the last thing they saw. And the last thing they saw was the better offensive line just dominate. And everyone wants now what the Eagles have, and that's the line of scrimmage. So with that being said, I think this offensive line class, I'd be surprised if it's not cooked by 29. If like the guys, and so the guys who would be in that 17 to 29 range, I'd put Tyler Booker from Alabama, the guard, Gray Zabel, North Dakota State, interior offensive lineman, Josh Simmons, the Ohio State tackle. The one that might be there is Josh Connerly, the Oregon offensive tackle, who's kind of in that range, but he's very much like a project. And so that's, projects at offensive line. Sometimes they go day 1, a lot of times they go day 2. So I think there might not be great value there in the offensive line class just because a lot of GMs will have made that decision before them. And you look ahead of them, teams like the Texans, it's like they're going to for sure draft an offensive lineman. So there's just a lot of needy teams before pick 29. So I think that might be cooked. Defensive end, though, is probably where I see value arising. It's such a deep class, and just, in a deep class, when you have that much talent, and again, people might go the Philly model and draft defensive ends for teams that might not necessarily, quote unquote, need defensive end. But when there's just so many talented guys, and I think this class qualifies as one, just someone who, if say there was only like 2 first round grades at defensive end, would have gone 10 to 15 picks higher just because, oftentimes it is a need and who's their conversation. And so they'll be pushing down a lot of talented guys because there's just so many of them. So I think defensive end's a position where there could be. And then I also think wide receiver is a position where there could be, just because all these guys are kind of fringe first rounders. There's not, outside of after Travis Hunter, and I'd probably put Ted McMillan, there's not like a surefire stud in this draft class. So whether it's Matthew Golden, whether it's Luther Burden, whether it's Emeka Egbuka, I think one of them is going to be on the board at pick 29, just because they're all kind of that range of players to begin with. And just, you'll see a lot of teams trend more toward the trenches before they trend towards wideouts. So if we're just looking around the draft, I think those are the positions. Cornerback, though, I think cornerback after the top 2, Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron, it's like, I'm out on the corners until the second round. I just think that's where the value is then going to be.
What about like a guy like Siobhan Ravel, from East Carolina? Like, because his film in 23 is like pretty good, traitsy, like I enjoyed watching him. And again, I'm not saying that you're wrong, because I could see him going top of the second round, no problem. Mm-hmm. But interesting guy there. What kind of grade do you have on him?
Yeah, he's one of the wild cards in this draft class because it's just a couple games, such a supreme athlete, but ACL, small level of competition. He was a guy that, kind of like a Quinyon Mitchell last year, where people like Quinyon Mitchell's tape. He goes to Senior Bowl, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, Quinyon Mitchell's cornerback 1. Siobhan Ravel could have done that. We just never got to see it. So, it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever, though, if someone at the back end of the first round, whether it's the Commanders or whether it's like the Eagles, who have the obvious need at corner, go and say, we'll take the chance just because of what he could be if he just would have been fully healthy this past season.
So you got a lot of different styles of players at all those positions we just talked about. Let's go back to edge, because I think that's the one that fans have latched on to most here. When you look at what a commander is at this point. When you watch what this team did last year, what you've seen Quinn like in the past, et cetera, is there a guy or a couple of guys that stand out to you as like the physical style, the get off, the things that Quinn really likes at that position?
The one guy I keep going back to is probably Donovan Ezaraku, the BC edge. He's just real tuned up, man. I mean, a little undersized, but of all the top guys, so like I'd even throw Abdul Carter in the mix. Abdul Carter, of all the guys getting like first round hype, he probably has the best hands. Like he's probably the most polished pass rusher. And now that's not like he's not like Latu was last year. He's not like Aiden Hutchinson was a few years ago. He's not elite, but he is very good and very NFL ready in a lot of different ways. And just the kind of athlete that even on like stunts and stuff can make an impact from day one. So I do think of all the guys who are likely to be there, he's the one that really, to me, feels like a Dan Quinn sort of edge pick.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned, there was a couple other edges there. Obviously, you mentioned Nick Scorton as a guy that's potentially falling. Guy that's interesting to me is like Landon Jackson because the athletic profile, and I really like the tape. Again, not the best pass rusher, but man, he plays like with some violence, which I really enjoy. So like, how do you feel about kind of those larger edge rushers? Again, it seems redundant based on what they did in free agency, but I like good football players. So
yeah, and him, you could probably rush him on third downs on the interior too. There's just, and that's why I say like day two, uniquely in this edge class, there's a lot of guys because I think he falls to day two. I think Scorton falls to day two just because it's just a logjam. Jackson, though, I don't love his tape as a pass rusher. And again, I think he can be a plug and play run defender, but it's just so few and far between that you see it all sync up. And as much as I love athletes off the edge, I love coordination too. And you just don't see that consistently with him. And at the Senior Bowl, he had a really tough time in the one-on-ones. Just had one of the, of all the edge guys there, he probably had one of the worst weeks amongst the group. So that's why I think he's probably a day two. But again, if you're betting on traits at one position on the football field, it is edge.
Are there any other like pass rush? I'm going to call them pass rush specialists for lack of a better way to put it, but guys with real pass rush juice, pass rush polish that maybe there's some other holes in their game, but that part you believe is going to work at the NFL level that could either be in play at 29 or maybe still, despite the fact that that trait is so coveted, be around at the end of the second round when Washington gets on the clock again at 61.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of guys back of the second round. The one I love is Braden Swinson from LSU. On the older side, but like he knows how to rush the passer. He's not a super high end traits guy, but he is capable and has a understanding of how to get past offensive tackles. I think Josiah Stewart from Michigan too is another third down guy only, where he's 6 foot tall or just over 6 foot, 249. So he's not like an every down edge, but you want some juice in your third down packages and want a guy who can be, just play with his hair on fire. Josiah Stewart's that sort of guy. So uniquely in this edge class, there's just day two is chock full of guys in that sort of mold that you can find to maybe play one certain sort of role.
And then I'm surprised you didn't mention like David Walker from Central Arkansas.
It's probably because I talk about him too much.
But I mean, like he's an interesting cat.
Talk
like
about him more.
Not super like the measurables aren't there, but like the film's excellent. Small school guy. I watched some stuff on him last night. Because you were coming on, I figured you'd just be talking about him nonstop. But here we are. You didn't even talk about him.
Because I've legitimately twice already talked about him. I did Kevin Clark's show and I did my network show where we talked about the edge class. And it was just like a full-on David Walker love fest. And I was like, I got to throw in another name. But David Walker's like, there is, and I think you know this, Logan, there's a body type that you don't want to block. And it's the body type that you literally can't out leverage, that you can never get underneath because you're just not going to ever get that guy cleanly. And you watch him on tape, and it's just obviously it's so hard to evaluate who he's going up against. But then at Senior Bowl, no one stopped his bull rush.
I don't think he lost a rep. Like it was just crazy to think in like a one-on-one situation, you're gonna like mess one of them up. I don't think he messed any up. I just went back and watched them all last night, which is pretty wild. So
so he is uniquely situated to continue to do that at the next level. I'm a huge fan of his game. I think I have him like top 30 on my draft board. I just I know that's going to work. It's Brandon Graham. Like it's a body type that's worked for every guy that's kind of had it.
So where do you think he does? I know you're high on him and I understand what you're talking about. Cause again, the production's good. And I think I go back to like this Jared Verse thing last year, like elite power plays in the NFL. And if you think he's got elite power, it's going to play. But where do you think he ends up getting drafted? Is he a third round guy? Is he a second round guy? Like what's going on there?
I think probably third round at the end of the day, just because one, when you're, some teams just won't take a 6-foot defensive end. They're just like, we want X, Y, Z. We have these cutoffs. And so you're off a certain amount of boards, and that just pushes you down just by the nature of that being the case. So I think third round, but man, like I said, I'd take him 29. If I was just like, if I had to, and there's no one else on the board, I'd be willing to. That's how highly I think of his game.
There we go. That's what I came here for. Is that just David Walker promo?
You got to give us what we. I mean, look, Mike. If you got a guy, if you got a type, you can't hold him away from our audience.
Well, I haven't heard many other David Walker truthers. That's why I didn't want to It's like talking about conspiracy theories. When you get another conspiracy theory guy, all of a sudden I'm in, and we can go toe to toe.
The other one I want to ask you about day 2, day 3, maybe or second, third, maybe fourth round guy is Oladejo from UCLA. I thought he really flashed at the Senior Bowl, and when I see Commander tag, I feel like I see that guy. You know what I mean? Just like a violent kind of kamikaze type player who's a little stiff, but good football player. And
the kind of versatility that, can play off ball in a pinch if you need to, like a true 3-4 outside linebacker type. And I think his best ball is ahead of him. He's not like super twitched up, but he is flexible. He has like the bend that you want off the edge. And I think, if I'm just like going back to Dan Quinn's time with the Cowboys and like kind of who he drafted a lot of guys who were bendy, like flexible edge rushers. That's kind of who we coveted. Those guys who can if you're stunting inside, they can dip around a guard and still get home. Those guys are weapons. And to me, he is that sort of mold. And so I don't think he goes first. I think that's still a little rich, just given that, we really haven't seen it yet. But what we saw in the limited amount of time he was on the edge, it makes you feel really excited about what what his next step could be.
Yeah, we know that DQ. I would say we know that DQ is not afraid of a guy with pass rush upside as a project. Like, obviously, the ultimate version of that is Parsons. But even Logan, if you think about last year, what they tried to do with Jamin's, let's find out. If they can get a guy that's more suited for it, that has some experience, and maybe, Jamin, I wouldn't say was the most flexible guy, but if he's got the bend, then, they certainly, I think, believe in their ability to get the most out of that type of player.
To me, it sounds like you can get an edge rusher, a quality edge rusher that's maybe more specific. Definitely in the second round, definitely third round. I think DB is also interesting because fans have been clamoring for DB at 29. But I look at Benjamin Morris, Amos, some of these other names that feel like day 2 kind of guys.
Yes.
Is there anybody in there that you're like, man, this guy's got that something that I'm really into that Commanders fans should be aware of?
See, the one that I really love, and I'm not sure how he played with the Commanders, Darian Porter, who I'm like, dude,
you're in, huh? You're in.
He's
the short, squatty DN and the really tall, rangy corner. I love it.
He's insane. Truly one of the freakiest athletes I have seen at the cornerback position. What he's capable of doing is outlandish. Now, again, you're going to have to teach him to tackle. And that's kind of scary because he was a wide receiver to start his career, and it'll improve, but he's been a corner for 3 years. It's not like he just all of a sudden got told he had to tackle last year and couldn't tackle. It's been 3 years now where he couldn't see the football field because he couldn't tackle. But as far as man coverage traits, dude, that guy has high-end man coverage traits. So he's the one that gets me excited on day 2. But I'm with you there about those back end of the first round guys that, might sneak into mocks, whether it's Trey Amos, whether it's Maxwell Hairston, whether it's Benjamin Morrison. It's just they're fine. Morrison I probably like the most just in terms of on tape, but then he has a hip injury, and it's is a hip important for a corner? I think so, and it's a second hip injury, so it's a recurring thing at this point, so he'll fall.
Would you put Azareye'h Thomas in that bucket also, or is he in a different tier?
He would be in that bucket, but again, he's more I'd rather take him at 60 than I would at 30. It's just he's closer to 60 than 30. So all those guys, I feel kind of like that they're closer to back end of the second than top end of or back end of the first. But, and just historically look at corners, you don't need to invest a first to find quality corners. It's more so than pretty much every other position. Every other quote unquote premium position. You can find guys not even second, third. You can find guys fourth, fifth that can be competent players for you. It's one of those type of positions that doesn't necessarily need to be attacked early.
Do you have any confidence scouting corners? Because the biggest crap. Like, there's guys that are awesome for 4 years in the NFL, go to a new team or get a new DC, and then they suck. Like, that is the nature of the position. So how do you even bother scouting such a volatile position? And, Logan and I have talked about this in the past, right? Like, there's certain positions you take earlier because you feel confident in the scout, and certain positions fall in the draft because you're just not as confident that it's going to work out, even if you're doing the best you can. So as someone who's doing it on this side of it, how do you begin to attack such a volatile and bizarre position?
Well, you start by, again, like I said, not drafting them super highly if you're not super confident in them, right? If their tape doesn't look like Travis Hunter's, Will Johnson's, Jahdae Barron's, just say it's okay. Like, we can wait. We can find one later, right? We can admit our ignorance on not knowing if this guy will translate or not. And also, it's such a physically demanding position that if you are dinged up a little bit, say you break your foot, come back next year and it's just not quite the exact same. You can go from a all-pro corner to a below average corner in the NFL based off of one minor injury that just doesn't get back to 100%, just because you just have to be in tip-top shape to make up ground on tip-top athletes at the NFL level. So it's so much different from, even wide receiver in that regard, in that you're always having to come from behind. You're always having to make up ground. Whereas wide receiver, even if you lose a step, you still are the first mover, and it doesn't make as big a difference.
And is that the position you have the hardest time evaluating, or is there another one that you're like, oh, this one, man, no one?
I think
likes
linebacker's the one where it's just
tough.
Even just look at the NFL's track record linebacker, Jamin Davis, who you mentioned. It is such a mental position along with physical position, probably more so than the most, after quarterback 1, linebacker 2, and just the mental load that is put on your plate at the NFL level from day one, that I think historically, it wasn't a position like that. Historically, it was one like in the mid 2000s, 90s, whatever. Guys hit the ground running. A lot of rookie of the years, the defensive side of the ball were linebackers. But the game has changed so much, and you have to see so much and process so much that you just need reps. You just need to see stuff. And so oftentimes, you're probably better off signing your mid-tier 5th-year guy in the NFL to play linebacker for you than you are drafting one number 20 overall and banking on him to start right away.
So that was something I want to ask you real quick. At 29, is there any linebacker that you would put on the board there? Because again, like Jihad Campbell, I think is special in terms of movement skills. Mm-hmm. Is he in that 17 to 29 bucket for you? Because I was just thinking through like positions, and I thought I'd bring him up real quick while we're talking.
Yeah, so linebacker nowadays, I think the only linebackers I would ever take in the first round are ones that can blitz like defensive ends, right? If a guy really has high-end pass rushing traits as an off-ball linebacker, I'll take that chance, because everyone and their mother is doing these, hybrid fronts and using their linebackers as weapons in the blitzing game. And if you don't have that guy, and if you do have a guy who's like a real game changer, it can be as valuable almost as a defensive end, especially on third downs. So that's the only position where if a guy really has high-end pass rush traits, I could take that in the first round. But if he's just a pure off-ball linebacker and you're banking on him and like what you see in coverage and what you see against the run in college to translate to the NFL, doesn't always happen right away.
So 29 receivers, there's probably more options there, and certainly a position that where Washington's done a lot of work in free agency to put a floor underneath them. With Debo, we'll see if Michael Gallup is a player for them coming out of retirement. Noah Brown coming back. We'll see. But certainly long-term, they're looking to add to that room opposite of Terry McLaurin. You've got in your latest mock, which is a couple weeks old at this point, I'm sure you have another one coming relatively soon, but you had Golden falling there. Is he the top of that bucket for you? Or is there's someone else that you would like if you're Washington, would you like there to be an even better option that's reasonably available at 29?
So I have Burden ahead of Golden. Actually, I have Ibuka ahead of Golden too, but it's pretty close with all three of those guys. And I think Burden probably a little too redundant with Deebo Samuel. Like, he is that sort of guy in your offense, so wouldn't go with him. Meka Ibuka, I think for the Commander specifically, I like Golden a little bit more just because he's more of an outside wide receiver. He's more of like a complete route runner. Whereas Ibuka is more of your work the middle of the football field, savvy, be on the same page with your quarterback. It's like that'd be a nice skill set to have. But I think a separator across from Terry could really do damage just with how much attention has to get paid to Terry. So I think Golden's probably your best pure separator of those three. And because of that, I would love that fit. Now, I don't see 4.29 when I watch his tape. He's not like your speed vertical threat, but he's much more of a complementary number 2 type of wide receiver.
Yeah, his route running nuance I think is outstanding. And of the guys you mentioned, Mbuka's talented, obviously, but like Luther Burton's not super polished. Golden has I just can't get over how well he decelerates and accelerates out of routes, man. It's special. So, I think he'd be a great complementary piece for Terry. Any other offensive playmakers you'd look in that same 17 to 29 bucket? I think that's Craig asked me the other day, and I actually thought about it, and I was like, there's probably a running back, maybe a tight end that fits in that group. How about for you?
Yeah, Colston Loveland is probably the only other playmaker that I would take in that range. I don't know where he's going to end. I mean, Tyler Warren too. I think he'll probably be off the board by 17 though. The running backs, there are some great running backs in this class. Ashton Genty, I would take in that range. I think he'll again be off the board. After Ashton Genty though, it's like the difference between Amarion Hampton and whoever I have RB5 is not so big that I'm using a first round on it, because RB5 will probably be there at the back end of the second, or RB6. It's such a loaded class that sure, if it was a terrible running back class, I'd be okay with someone drafting Amarion Hampton in the first round. Okay, but it's not. It's awesome. It's one of the best ones since like 2018. So for sure, if you're deciding between running back at 29 other positions, every single other position I'm taking before running back.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask real quick, because we're nerding out here over the draft, is it sounds to me honestly
what I'm
like
here for. I'm just riding shotgun over here, whatever. Backseat driving. Occasionally, I'm like, hey guys, turn signal real quick. All right, keep going.
Yeah, so it really sounds to me honestly like if you could trade out of 29 and get into the top half of the second round, like what's the difference between offensive playmaker, corner, offensive line, between edge, and it doesn't seem like there's a big valley there between the players you'd get at 29 potentially and the players you'd get at 35. Like it just seems like you're going to add more draft capital, and then you're in this kind of, I think, like a sweet spot of like some very talented receivers. Like Higgins comes to mind, Knoll from Iowa State, they both come to mind. There's some talented running backs. Like is there a big difference? Doesn't seem that way.
Not a big difference in my opinion. I would love a trade back on the Commanders. Oftentimes you think like, hey, we're in this Super Bowl window. Let's go up and get our guy, right? No, I think you're in the opposite. You just trade away a bunch of picks. You need some more draft capital. You always need that young base coming through, because once you want that long-term success, you want that long-term team building, and that happens via the draft. So I agree. The difference between those guys and then Jaden Higgins, who I love, Kyle Williams from Washington State, who I love, not as much as maybe Chris Sims loves, but I definitely love. I think Alec Ayomanor from Stanford, if you told me any guy in this draft class from day 2 turns into like a number 1, he's probably who I'd bet on. The guy has really high-end traits for the position.
Can we double click on him real quick? Because I have seen him at like mid-20s. I have seen him in a mock in the 4th round. Why are people so all over the place on him, and why do you like him?
So he's bigger bodied guy, right? And if I'm drafting a guy in day 2, more often than not, I want size. Not a lot of day 2 undersized wide receivers have hit in the NFL. They look better in college than they do in the NFL. And the true undersized guys that hit usually are so good. They're like Devontae Smith, Garrett Wilson. Like you draft from top 10, you just know they're going to be good. So undersized guys, you want size on day 2. He's big bodied, physical. And we talked to this guy at the combine. He was all business. He literally says, I've treated this since I stepped on campus at Stanford like it was my job. And it shows on tape. He plays super physical. He blocks really well. He just doesn't have great hands, but he also grew up playing hockey. He's from Canada. He wasn't like playing football the way kind of we were probably playing football in the backyard. It's just not the same culture there. So late to the game, but like the athlete is spectacular. Ran the 4.4s. Very explosive, just so like average ball skills, but has the traits of a guy who could be, a number 1 type of wide receiver at the next level.
So Logan, do you see the ball skills stuff though, is like in your experience playing and watching guys, like, is that something you can develop? Cause like, this is terrible, but I'm going to just say it, like Benjamin St. Juste, great athlete, grew up playing hockey. And so Commanders fans are probably like, but it's a different deal when you're a corner versus a receiver. You can be a decent corner. Not that Benjamin was like amazing, but like you can do some stuff at corner without having to catch the football. ultimately, it doesn't matter how good of an athlete you are at wide receiver, you have to catch the ball at the end of it. Otherwise, none of it matters.
Yeah,
So, Logan, did you see that? And Mike, have you seen that? That's a skill. Like, is it far enough that he can develop it? And do you see that as a skill that guys can really develop in the pros?
So for me, like the ball skills are not the best, but they're not they're not the thing that gets me concerned. Like I like the player a lot, and I agree with everything Mike said. I think the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause is he does have some upper body stiffness that makes me a little bit concerned, like in and out of breaks. Like when you watch him at the combine, I think that's a good opportunity because you go 1-1-1, you just see guys, and certain guys can snap down and get out, and he's a little bit sluggish. He's a big guy. He's like 215, right? So like that's to be expected. So I think for me, that to me is more of the red flag is the movement skills. And again, like he's not a bad. I say that and it's not like he's a bad mover. Like I think if there's a guy you want to take a shot on, it's definitely him because he runs well, he's competitive, he blocks, like all those things. But I just say like I've seen tight receivers. Like you mentioned Kyle Williams. Kyle Williams is like the opposite. He's like super slinky. He gets in and out of cuts really well. He does the receiver stuff at a high level. So it gives me more confidence in that type of player. But that's the one thing with him that I'm like a little like if the Commanders draft him, I'm stoked. But I'm a little on the fence about projection because of the movement stuff.
Yeah, he's not the kind of what you're describing, like the ability to like sink your hips, rotate down, and like provide a target. He's not a possession wide receiver. He's unique. He's like, you think big body, whatever. No, he's like a vertical threat. He is a downfield weapon. That's where when he's running routes, it looks the best, like a post, corners,
right?
Goes. That's where it's like, that's where you see his ability. So it's a weird projection, I'll say, with a guy like Alec Yeoman. That's why he's not getting, a ton of hype.
All right. So if we get into some of the later rounds, and Logan, if there's anybody else, actually, before we do that, Logan, is there anybody else early round that you want to circle around?
I wanted to ask him because I think this is super interesting because like I respect the heck out of Mike, but you were like, I actually like a lot of offensive tackles on day 2.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's something that I find really interesting because there are guys that I like that I think can play tackle, but I felt like there was way more guards in that landscape of guys that were going to convert. So just if you could throw some names out for Commanders fans, I think that'd be really helpful.
I'm right there with you that I think a lot of the day 2 tackles are ultimately kicking inside guys like Jonah, Sevenaya, Wyatt Milam.
Dude, Jonah S, baby. Let's go. Here we go.
those are guards. But guys like Charles Grant from William & Mary.
Dude, great. Let's talk about him. Talk about him because he's got the measurements. He moves well. Let's hit him up real quick.
I love his tape. And when I learned that he didn't play football until like junior year of high school and he was a wrestler before that, I was
Stop it. Really? Is that true?
True. Yes. That's why he ended up at William & Mary. That's why because he's a freak athlete and he didn't get the pre-draft process. I can't remember what the injury was, but didn't get Senior Bowl, didn't get combine, hasn't done his pro day because he was banged up. But like his tape it's what it looks like, right? There is a archetype at offensive tackle because there's only so many athletes in the world that can like do what it takes to do at the NFL level. It's such a high cutoffs in terms of just size, movement skills, whatever. He ticks all those boxes. And then you see him and his ability to like re-leverage and use his hands. And it's like, that's also what it looks like. So there's so many things that he does where it's like, that's what it's going to look like or needs to look like to reach high-end performance at the NFL level. It's just, he's only been playing football for like 5 or 6 years. He went to William & Mary. He's not playing against the best competition, but you saw a lot of improvement over the course of his career. So I love his tape. I think that's a guy that if he's there back end around 2, it's just like, you take him in a heartbeat because you'll always need offensive tackles at some point, and you always want to have that guy in the building that you're developing to, ultimately take over because injuries always happen. So he's one of my favorites in this class.
And then I'm assuming like Ozzie Trapillo, maybe Anthony Belton. I don't know. I'm trying to think of some guys that I would think could play tackle that you might be in on there.
So probably my next favorite, if we're talking about day 2 off, I think Josh Connerly is like obviously like he's kind of borderline day 1.
Yeah.
My next
That's
favorite.
Cheating. You're cheating if you say Josh Connerly.
My next favorite's probably Donovan Jackson. I think
as a tackle.
As tackle. And I don't
not
think
the first guy I've heard say that.
I don't think he's ever going to be an elite either tackle or guard. Right? I don't think he's got that quarterback. I don't just see like the suddenness and the sort of urgency and there's the polish that makes me think he's going to get to a high end. But I see a guy who plays the brand of football that I think can work in the NFL. He's so steady. He's never, getting out over his haunches. He's never over aggressive. He just lets the game come to him, and down in, down out is consistent. So I'm a fan of his game, but again, I'm a fan of his game at back end of the second round as opposed to back end of the first, because I just think he can start. Will he ever be a Pro Bowler? I doubt it, but he can start at the next level. And the offensive tackle position, that just has a ton of talent.
All right, so if we get into some of the positions that you really like, Commanders don't have a third rounder, so you get into that fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round. Is there a position that you really like? Running back seems to be kind of the consensus, in part because the positional value, it's always going to be in the mix there, but this class in particular seems pretty deep. But they're whether it's an agreement there or another group that you're like, man, if I got a hole here, I think I can find a really good football player in the back half of this draft. What position?
Yeah, I think running back for sure qualifies as that. I also think DT is going to end up being fourth round. There's going to be some DTs that are going to be able to start for you. Just because I'm looking at my DT board, and I'm like, not this many usually go in the top 100. There's I probably have like 15 defensive tackles in my top 100. I'm just like, you don't see that many go in the top 100. So guys like CJ West from Indiana, I think he's an ass kicker on the interior, like a true nose tackle that can play the run at a high level. He's 6 foot though. I don't think he goes in the top 100. Someone like Vernon Broughton from Texas, who has like some juice to his game, who could be a pass rusher. I'm not sure he goes in the top 100. Jordan Phillips from Maryland, another like big, strong nose tackle who can play with good leverage. I'm not sure he goes in the top 100. There's just a lot of DTs that 4 or 5 are probably going to slip down boards into the fourth round. And that's where I'd like to take some of these guys. I think you can still get a player in next class.
Love that call out. And the other thing I want to ask you about was like receiver specifically, because like usually there's like a nice tail to the receiver class. And obviously we talked about the top, definitely not the strongest this year, but I do feel like there are some diamonds in the rough later on that could be interesting.
Well, this receiver class has speed. I think uniquely there are so many like 4-3 guys who aren't terrible. Like that can be like an Olamide Zaccheaus. Like they can play that role where it's just like, yeah, he's just doing a couple things, but you really don't need him to do much more. I'm trying to think here. Like Keandre Lambert-Smith from Auburn, I think can be that guy. Jalen Lane for Virginia Tech, Dante Thornton from Tennessee. I mentioned Kyle Williams. Who knows where he's going to go from Washington State, because he hasn't gotten a lot of hype throughout the process. So Isaiah Bond from Texas, he's probably going to fall because of character concerns, but like that guy can roll too. So there's so many speed wide receivers that could very well end up on day 3 that, I don't think you're ever going to confuse them with, Deshaun Jackson, but they're guys who can, in that offense, especially when you have one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL, a quarterback, just come on the field for 10 snaps a game and maybe hit a big one.
Yeah, do you think like a guy like Xavier Williams is now a 4th round guy? Like where does he fall in that?
Xavier Williams is like
from TCU, by the way.
Yeah, TCU wide receiver. He played like some running back. He's kind of that hybrid, whatever that has come out a lot in recent years, is like a Laviska Shenault type, where he'll take handoffs, you get the ball in his hands, and then let him roll. But I just watch him run routes, and I'm like, I don't see a wide receiver, like a polished wide receiver, but he's a scheme touch sort of guy. So I think, given the track record of like a lot of those guys who have come out, and I mentioned Laviska Shenault and like his struggles, they haven't panned out more often than not. Your Antonio Gibson's, you uniquely was in that mold. So I think he's probably going to end up on day 3, unfortunately, because of that.
So the thing that's funny about those guys is like AG was a 1,000-yard rusher as a rookie, so it wasn't bad. They just never figured out, can we unlock a new level? And maybe there wasn't necessarily a new level to unlock. And offensively, a lot of those guys haven't done great. But defensively, there's been a couple of guys where it's like, I don't know his position. And those guys are Brian Branch and Cooper DeJean. And it's like, these are studs. These are Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber players in Branch's case. And DeJean certainly looks like if he gets a full season under his belt at the level he played last year, he's going to be right there as well. So do you look at the offensive guys as this is a coaching failure, or is it just that much harder to do on that side of the ball for these positionless guys, and you almost need a position, need a role, as opposed to being able to get in the flow of a game without one where you're just every time you're in, everyone's like, hey, he's going to get the ball at the NFL level.
Yeah, I think you need a role in the NFL, unfortunately, because say you're one of the top 3 wide receivers, you can't just be incapable of running whatever route's called, right? If you can't just game plan around to feed a guy who's like, needs scheme touches. So you have to be able to do the entire playbook. And so if you can't do that and be reliable, you just won't see the football field in the NFL. They'll just say, sorry, but we have someone who can. It's just too important to have that ability to not be a liability. So yeah, it's harder to kind of scheme guys touches. Whereas at the collegiate level, a lot of times that scheme touch guy, he's your best athlete. Once you get to the NFL, Stephen Williams all of a sudden isn't your best athlete anymore. He's kind of like just a guy at the NFL level comparatively. So a lot of times he's the best athlete. So yeah, you get the ball in his hands a bunch, but it just doesn't work like that. You got to be a supreme athlete to really get by at that, doing that at the NFL.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I just think it's interesting that like on the defensive side, it's kind of like, is this guy safety? Is he a nickel? I don't know. Get him out there, and then it's worked.
Well, the nickel's kind of evolved into almost more valuable than safety at this point because you're just involved in so many more plays. You're a linebacker and you're a corner. Like you're a linebacker for run purposes, but a corner for pass down purposes. So like a lot of times that's you're coveting those guys even more now. But in this class, there's not a lot of good slots. Last year had a lot of slot corners. This year I'm like, I don't think any of these guys are slots. Like a lot of the safeties last year were like, oh yeah, they're safeties / slot. This year, the safeties are all like true safeties. I think Andrew Mukuba is the only one from Texas who I'm like, okay, he could play the slot, but everyone else, I think is pretty much a true deep, too high or single high safety.
I got a question about it going the other way. Linebacker to maybe safety, kind of big nickel, and ran Medrano. Is that how you say his name? From UCLA, the number 20. Is that how you say his name? You know what I'm talking about?
I have not watched him. Kane Medrano, that one?
Dude.
Okay, should I put him on the list? All right, sorry.
So I don't want to overhype him, but like he did well at the combine. Like he tested well, ran a good 40, had an excellent 3-cone, sub-7 3-cone, good vertical jump. And he kind of plays like this will linebacker, but plays Mike, plays on the edge, like defensive end for them sometimes. I thought this would be an interesting kind of like the other way. You know what I'm saying? Because he's like 220. You know what I'm saying? So you haven't watched him, but when you do,
add him to your list, Renner.
I just did. I literally did. I see you was talking. I'm trying to think of anyone who has done that. If there has been anyone, I thought, who's the Buffalo linebacker? Terrell Bernard, I thought could have. Because he's like 215 pounds. They just like kept him at linebacker though. I'm not sure if anyone has done that in recent years. That's a good call out.
It's interesting because like he does play a little bit of that like star role. So like I just was like, and I just happened to have watched him last night for a linebacker show we did for another podcast I do. And I was like, I wanted to ask you about him because I do think it's the other way. Like he's got good man skill, but again, does that translate to the NFL? He's got great movement skill. He's got a nice playmaking feel. But interesting kind of the other way, you know?
Well, I know Fred Warner was a star in college at BYU. Yep. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was a star at Notre Dame. If you could do that well, I feel like if you're a good player in that role in college, that bodes well for what you can do in coverage at the NFL level.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's wrap up with this one. Your favorite day 3 prospect or prospects? Like you're a guy that's almost the guilty pleasure. I'm watching this guy. I just love his tape, even though I know he's going to be a 6th round pick.
Well, I would have said David Walker, Kyle Williams, but I think like at this point they're probably going higher than that. Just from what I've heard. You think
Kyle Williams? I mean, he didn't. It's
your fault on Walker, man. You're just pumping him up the draft board.
We'll see.
His agent should call you for sure.
Well, I listened to Chris Sims because Chris Sims had him wide receiver 2, and he said,
"Did you really?"
He had him wide receiver 2. So Chris Sims said he got text afterwards about it that from GM saying you're dead right about this or something, or like you're right, or so. So if that's the case, hard to see him falling outside the top 100. I think CJ West from Indiana is probably my favorite. I know his agent used to work at PFF. He said he hopes he gets into the 3rd round, but is probably more realistically going in the 4th. So him or probably either Harold Fannin Jr., the Bowling Green tight end. I don't think he goes top 100, but I love that guy's game.
Are you in on him? I've talked to a bunch of people about him. You're in.
I love his game. What do you think about this tight end class, Logan? Because we haven't talked about tight ends. Obviously, I don't think a commander is going to be coveting that position, but like
they could, by the way,
he's interesting Well, they went second round.
So I think the thing for me is like he's interesting and he does separate well on like corners and like kind of posts. I wonder about his short area quickness. And again, like, am I going to put him on the field over like a true slot receiver? Probably not. Like when I look at like Zach Ertz is a great example because the Commanders fans just saw him. Like he brings a skill set that is unique to a receiver. Is Harold Fenton Jr. a receiver plus? I don't know. So I kind of lean more towards like the bigger body, like, you know, Aronde Gadsden, Terrence Ferguson, and that kind of like true F role. Guys with some horsepower and some juice, some size. But it's weird. It's a weird watch because he led the FBS in receiving. Like, what the heck are we talking about? So obviously it works. He killed Penn State. He looked good at the Senior Bowl. I don't know what to do with him.
And the coaches there talked about him as if he was like a god. They're like, this guy's like a different. I mean, obviously, like he was 50% of their passing game. So like, obviously, you're gonna talk about. But they were saying like, you know, in practice, he's never seen him drop a ball. That they thought like he could have played two ways and played linebacker too, and that they like debated it. Like he was that good. Just a unique athlete.
Weird. I think it's the running. He runs weird.
He's super knock-kneed, and then Bo like no, not
pigeon-toed.
No, the other way. No, it's the other way. He's out.
Duck-footed.
He's duck-footed. Yes. And so like he literally can't turn with that, but he can like outcuts because like just physiologically he can really stick his foot in the ground and bounce out of it. So, you know, when you watch him run a corner, it's like he doesn't lose speed because his body is like not even, it's kind of just how he runs. So
I think you articulate, I was listening to something you said the other day where it's like you know, to do that, your knee has to be inside your foot.
Yes.
And his knee is like always inside of his foot.
Yeah, it's always.
which is bad for running straight, but if I want to change direction, it's pretty good. So
yes. So
there you go.
You're in. You're in.
It's science. We're in. That's somehow where we're going to end this podcast. Mike Renner with us here on Take Command. You can catch him out on all of CBS Sports programming and everything leading up to the draft, including on their website, the mock drafts and the write-ups and everything there. And then, Mike, the name of your podcast, if people want to check out you in podcast land.
Pushing the Pile.
Pushing the Pile. We're pushing the pile, everybody.
Long, right? With Kyle Long. Yep.
Dude, great dude.
Yeah. Your former teammate, yeah? Chicago?
Yeah. And psycho in the best kind of way, I'm sure, as you know.
Yeah, offensive lineman and blocking tight ends. Interesting people to work with. Mike, we'll have to bond over that another time. It's Mike Renner, everybody. Take Command. We'll be back with another mailbag early next week. Get your questions in on Instagram, the website, email. Y'all know how to do it at this point. We're done. See ya. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.